Chapter 1. The Experiment. The Dawn of Neural Linking. In the year 2347, humanity had mastered interstellar travel, artificial intelligence, and neural technology that allowed minds to temporarily link. This breakthrough, known as neural synchronization, or simply neural linking, was developed to enable pilots and soldiers to share skills, memories, and emotions during critical missions. However, the technology was still experimental, and the risks were significant. Inside the Celestis Neural Research Facility, nestled in orbit around the vibrant blue planet of Helion 4, Dr. Eris Calderon oversaw an ambitious project to perfect neural linking. A blend of psychologist and neuroengineer, she had devoted her life to understanding the human mind and the possibilities of merging consciousness. She believed neural linking could unite people in ways never imagined, fostering understanding, cooperation, and even empathy between species. That day, however, something would go horribly wrong. The volunteers. 2 test subjects stood in a sterile chamber bathed in dim blue light. The room hummed with the soft sounds of machinery and the rhythmic clicks of the linking apparatus calibrating itself. The first subject, Ava Reelan, was a human freelancer, a sharp-witted smuggler with a rebellious streak. Her silver hair fell over one shoulder, and her vibrant green eyes darted nervously around the room. "I don't like this," Ava muttered, shifting on her feet. "This whole linking minds thing feels invasive." "You agreed to it," replied the second subject, a tall, stoic alien named Kale Saren, his voice calm but laced with faint irritation. Kale was of the Vexery, a reptilian humanoid species known for their advanced intellect and unwavering discipline. His deep violet scales shimmered under the light, and his golden eyes bore into Ava with unnerving intensity. "I agreed because they're paying me," Ava shot back. "Not because I trust any of you." Dr. Calderon stepped between them, a tablet in her hands. "Relax, both of you. This is a controlled experiment. The neural link will last no more than 30 minutes. It's simply to measure compatibility between a human and a Vexery. You'll be perfectly safe." Kale folded his arms. "You're certain there's no risk of permanent entanglement?" Eris hesitated for the briefest moment, then smiled reassuringly. "Theoretically, it's impossible. The system is designed to sever the link automatically if anything goes wrong." "Theoretically," Ava muttered under her breath. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Fine, let's just get this over with." The neural link. The 2 subjects sat in opposing chairs, sleek neural helmets placed carefully over their heads. Wires connected the helmets to a central hub, which glowed with faint pulses of blue light. Technicians monitored the system from behind reinforced glass, their hands hovering over controls. Dr. Calderon's voice came through a speaker. "Initializing neural link in 3, 2, 1. Ava felt a strange warmth spread through her scalp as the helmet activated. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, she was weightless. Then, suddenly, her mind was no longer her own. Inside the link, Ava and Kale found themselves standing in a featureless void, the space around them shifting with faint colors and sounds. The sensation was disorienting, like standing in a dream but being fully aware. "What the hell is this?" Ava asked, spinning in place. Her voice echoed strangely. Kale stood rigid, his sharp gaze scanning the void. "This is the construct, a shared mental space created by the link." Ava groaned, rubbing her temples. "Yeah, thanks for the explanation, Professor. Why does it feel like my brain's being squeezed?" "You're not used to it," Kale said. "The Vexery have been experimenting with neural tech for decades. This is primitive by comparison." Ava scowled. "Oh great, a lizard with a superiority complex." Before Kale could respond, a surge of energy rippled through the void. The space around them distorted, and a deafening hum filled the air. "What's happening?" Ava shouted. Kale's eyes narrowed. "Something's wrong. The link is unstable." In the real world, alarms blared. Technicians scrambled to stabilize the system, their voices overlapping in panic. Dr. Calderon's face paled as she studied the readings on her tablet. "This shouldn't be possible," she muttered. "The synchronization rate is skyrocketing." Back in the construct, Ava and Kale were enveloped in a blinding light. Their minds collided in a way the system was never designed to handle. Memories, emotions, and thoughts merged in a chaotic whirlwind, tearing through the barriers of their individuality. The bond. When the light faded, the void was gone. Ava and Kale stood in a strange, alien landscape, a hybrid of their memories and experiences. Towering buildings of sleek vexury design rose beside gritty human starports. The sky was a patchwork of stars and swirling nebulae. What just happened? Ava asked, her voice trembling. Kale's expression was uncharacteristically unsettled. Our minds. They've bonded. Ava stared at him, her heart racing. What does that mean? It means, Kale said slowly, that we're not separate anymore. Part of me is in you, and part of you is in me. Ava's breath caught as fragments of Kale's memories flashed through her mind. She saw moments from his childhood training with his people, the weight of responsibility he carried, the loneliness of his strict upbringing. At the same time, Kale's eyes widened as he experienced Ava's memories, her struggles as an orphan, her daring smuggling runs, her fierce independence. This can't be real, Ava whispered, clutching her head. I didn't agree to this. Kale clenched his fists, his calm demeanor cracking. Neither did I. But if we don't fix this, the consequences could be catastrophic. The aftermath. In the real world, the technicians managed to sever the link, but it was too late. Ava and Kale woke up gasping, their helmets removed, but the bond remained. They could feel each other's thoughts, emotions, even physical sensations bleeding across the connection. Dr. Calderon approached them cautiously. Are you both all right? Ava shot to her feet, glaring at her. You said this wasn't possible. I don't understand, Calderon stammered. The system was designed to prevent this. The synchronization rate was unprecedented. Kale stood, his movements tense. What does this mean for us? Calderon hesitated, then said, the bond is uncharted territory. We'll need to run more tests to understand the extent of it. Ava shook her head. No way. You're not hooking me up to that thing again. Kale stepped forward, his golden eyes locking onto Ava. We may not have a choice. If this bond is permanent, it could endanger both of us. Ava met his gaze, her anger fading into unease. What do we do? Kale's jaw tightened. We figure it out. Together. Chapter 2. The Unwanted Connection. The aftermath of the bond. Ava and Kale sat in the sterile debriefing chamber, their tension palpable. Dr. Calderon paced before them, her eyes darting between her tablet and the two subjects. Despite the severance of the neural link, the effects lingered, and the bond between them was undeniable. You're saying we're stuck? Ava asked, her voice rising in disbelief. You're the one who said this wasn't even possible. I said it was theoretically impossible, Calderon corrected, her voice strained. But the synchronization rate between you two was off the charts. Something unique happened, something we've never seen before. Kale sat rigid, his reptilian features betraying nothing of the storm brewing inside. But Ava could feel it. His emotions, confusion, frustration, and an undercurrent of fear flowed through the connection like whispers in the back of her mind. You're telling me I have to deal with his feelings now? Ava exclaimed, throwing her hands in the air. No offense, but I didn't sign up to babysit a vexury warrior's emotions. Kale's golden eyes narrowed. And I didn't volunteer to experience the chaos of your undisciplined thoughts, human. Enough, Calderon snapped, cutting through their bickering. This bond is unstable and uncharted. If you two don't learn to work together, it could spiral out of control and the consequences could be fatal. Ava froze. Fatal? You're just now telling us this? Calderon sighed, rubbing her temples. Neural bonds weren't meant to last. Your minds are entangled in ways the system wasn't designed to handle. If the bond destabilizes, it could cause severe neurological damage to both of you. Kale leaned forward, his tone cold. Then tell us how to fix it. Calderon hesitated. There might be a way, but it's dangerous. We'll need to synchronize your minds again, this time intentionally. If we can stabilize the bond, we might be able to safely unravel it. Ava stared at her, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh great, another round of mind melding. Just what I wanted. Kale rose to his feet, his posture commanding. We don't have a choice. If we don't do this, we could die. Ava met his gaze, her frustration giving way to reluctant acceptance. Fine. But if I end up with lizard brain, I'm blaming you. An unexpected side effect. The bond was more than just a tether, it was a doorway. Over the next few days, Ava and Kale discovered that their connection wasn't limited to sharing emotions. Memories, skills, and even instincts began to bleed through. It started small. Ava, who had never been particularly skilled at combat, suddenly found herself moving with the precision of a trained warrior. During a routine training exercise, she disarmed a holographic opponent in seconds, her body reacting faster than her mind could process. "What the hell?" she muttered, staring at the simulated weapon in her hand. Kale, watching from the observation deck, felt a surge of confusion. That was a vexery technique? Ava looked up at him, her eyes narrowing. "Wait, are you telling me I just borrowed your fighting skills?" Kale nodded slowly. "It seems the bond is deeper than we thought. Your actions were instinctual, as if you were drawing on my memories." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Does that mean you're picking up any of my skills?" Kale hesitated, then sighed. "I have an inexplicable urge to argue with authority and break rules." Ava smirked. "Welcome to my world, lizard boy." But the situation wasn't all humor. As their connection deepened, the line between their identities blurred. Ava caught glimpses of Kale's memories, his grueling training on the vexery homeworld, the weight of expectations placed upon him as a soldier. Meanwhile, Kale saw flashes of Ava's life, her desperate struggles to survive as a smuggler, the loneliness that gnawed at her despite her bravado. It was unnerving and intimate in equal measure. The threat emerges. While Ava and Kale grappled with their bond, a new danger loomed. Unknown to them, the Syndicate, a shadowy organization with a vested interest in neural linking, had caught wind of the experiment. They viewed the bond as a potential weapon, two minds fused into one, capable of sharing skills and knowledge in real time. A Syndicate operative named Joran Vex, a cunning and ruthless human with a penchant for manipulation, was dispatched to capture the pair. His mission was simple: bring Ava and Kale back alive, or ensure no one else could use them. Dr. Calderon received the warning too late. The Syndicate's forces descended upon the Celestis facility, their sleek, black ships surrounding the station in a show of overwhelming force. "They're here for the bond," Calderon said, her voice shaking as she addressed Ava and Kale in the lab. "You need to leave. Now." Kale stepped forward, his tone firm. "If they're here for us, we can't just run. They'll hunt us down." Ava rolled her eyes. "Great. So now we're fugitives. Could this day get any worse?" "Focus," Kale snapped, glaring at her. "If we don't work together, neither of us is getting out of here alive." Calderon handed them a data chip. "This contains the protocol for stabilizing your bond. You'll need to find a safe place to use it. I've arranged for a ship in the docking bay. Go now before they breach the lab." Ava hesitated, her instinct screaming at her to fight back. But Kale grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. "She's right. We need to go." The escape. The station descended into chaos as Syndicate forces stormed the halls. Ava and Kale moved with surprising coordination, their bond allowing them to anticipate each other's actions. Ava's agility and Kale's combat training made them a formidable pair, taking down Syndicate soldiers with a mix of human resourcefulness and vexery precision. "I'll admit," Ava said, panting as they sprinted toward the docking bay, "this bond thing has its perks." "Focus," Kale replied, his golden eyes scanning for threats. "We're not out of this yet." They reached the docking bay, finding the small freighter Calderon had arranged for them. As they boarded, the Syndicate operatives closed in, their weapons trained on the pair. Joran Vex appeared, his cold smile sending a chill down Ava's spine. "You two are coming with us," he said, his voice calm but threatening. "Dead or alive." Kale stepped in front of Ava, his posture protective. "We're not going anywhere with you." Joran raised an eyebrow. Bold words for someone who doesn't understand the power they're playing with. "That bond of yours? It's a weapon, and I'll make sure it's used for the right purposes." "Not a chance," Ava snapped, activating the ship's thrusters. "Hope you like the taste of failure." The freighter lifted off, narrowly escaping the Syndicate's grasp. As they broke free of the station, Ava and Kale shared a look, one of determination and reluctant camaraderie. A fragile partnership. As the ship sped away into the void, Ava slumped into the pilot's seat, her hands trembling. This is insane. What are we even supposed to do now? Kale sat beside her, his expression unreadable. We stabilize the bond. Then we deal with the syndicate. Ava sighed, leaning back. And after that? Kale met her gaze, his golden eyes softening slightly. We figure it out. Together. For the first time, Ava didn't feel entirely alone. Despite their differences, their bond, both literal and figurative, was something neither of them could ignore. Whether they liked it or not, their fates were intertwined. And as the stars stretched out before them, they knew their journey was only beginning. Chapter 3. Bonded in Danger. The aftermath of escape. The freighter hummed steadily as it cruised through the vast expanse of space, putting as much distance as possible between Ava, Kale, and the syndicate ships. Ava leaned against the pilot's console, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline crash. Across from her, Kale sat at the navigation terminal, his posture rigid, his golden eyes scanning the star charts with meticulous focus. "We barely made it out of there," Ava said, breaking the silence. "I don't know how you can sit there so calmly." Kale glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Panic serves no purpose. If we want to survive, we need to focus." "Yeah, thanks for the motivational speech, Commander Stoic," Ava muttered, rubbing her temples. She could feel his thoughts, faint but persistent, a strange pressure at the edge of her mind. "And stop thinking so loud. It's giving me a headache." Kale raised an eyebrow. "I could say the same to you." The tension between them hung thick in the air, but it was undercut by a sense of reluctant understanding. Despite their differences, the bond between them had already saved their lives more than once. The mission to stabilize. Dr. Calderon's data chip sat on the console between them, a small but vital piece of their survival. Ava picked it up, turning it over in her hands. "This thing better have some answers." Kale stood and crossed the small cabin, his presence imposing despite his calm demeanor. "The bond is a liability. If we can stabilize it, we might have a chance at breaking it." Ava frowned, her rebellious streak sparking. "Breaking it? Who says we have to break it? You ever think this thing between us might be useful?" Kale's gaze hardened. "This bond wasn't meant to happen. It's dangerous for both of us." Ava stood, her frustration boiling over. "Maybe it's dangerous because you're too afraid to admit you might need someone. Not everyone's a lone warrior, Kale." Kale's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to the console and began decrypting the data chip. The chip contained detailed instructions for stabilizing their bond, but the process was far from simple. It required accessing a neural bridge node, a rare piece of technology capable of safely managing the complexities of a shared consciousness. Fortunately or unfortunately, there was a functioning node on the planet Varanus, a lawless outpost controlled by mercenaries and smugglers. "Varanus," Ava said, reading over Kale's shoulder. "That place is a death trap?" Kale didn't look up. "Do you have a better idea?" Ava sighed. "No, but if we're going there, we'll need to be ready. Those mercenaries don't take kindly to strangers." Kale nodded, his resolve unshaken. "Then we'll be ready." A growing connection. As the freighter approached Varanus, Ava and Kale found themselves relying on their bond more and more. The connection, while still unstable, gave them an edge. They could anticipate each other's movements, share information without speaking, and even draw on each other's strengths. During a sparring session in the ship's cargo hold, Ava surprised even herself by matching Kale's precise, calculated movements. Her punches and kicks mirrored his techniques, and she moved with a speed and confidence she had never known. Kale stepped back, his golden eyes narrowing. "You're learning." Ava smirked, wiping sweat from her brow. "Guess your fancy warrior training is rubbing off on me." "It's more than that," Kale said. "The bond is strengthening. Our minds are synchronizing." Ava hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Kale's expression softened slightly, a rare flicker of vulnerability crossing his features. "I don't know." Arrival on Varanus. Varanus was a sprawling, chaotic planet teeming with activity. Its capital city, Craterfall, was a haven for criminals, mercenaries, and anyone looking to disappear. The streets were lined with neon signs, bustling markets, and the occasional brawl. The air was thick with the scent of oil, spice, and danger. Ava and Kale disembarked from the freighter, blending into the crowd as best they could. Ava's smuggler instincts kicked in, her sharp eyes scanning for potential threats. Kale walked beside her, his tall, imposing figure drawing a few curious glances but no immediate trouble. "The neural bridge node is in the east sector," Kale said, his voice low. "We'll need to move quickly." "Quickly and quietly," Ava added. "This place has eyes everywhere." As they made their way through the city, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Syndicate operatives could be anywhere, and the thought of Joran Vex finding them sent a chill down Ava's spine. The node and the betrayal. The neural bridge node was housed in a dilapidated research facility on the outskirts of Craterfall. The building was abandoned, its exterior covered in rust and graffiti, but the technology inside was still operational. Ava and Kale found the node in the facility's central chamber, a massive, circular machine with glowing conduits and a sleek control panel. The air buzzed with energy, and the node's hum resonated in their bones. "This is it," Ava said, her voice tinged with awe. "Let's hope it works." Kale stepped forward, his movements deliberate. "We'll need to interface with the node together. It will stabilize the bond by aligning our neural patterns. But it won't be easy." As they prepared to activate the node, the door behind them slammed open. Joran Vex strode in, flanked by syndicate enforcers, his cold smile sending a wave of dread through Ava. "Found you," Joran said, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "Did you really think you could hide?" Ava and Kale exchanged a glance, their bond sparking with shared determination. Without a word, they moved as one. The final battle. The chamber erupted into chaos as Ava and Kale fought side by side. The bond amplified their coordination, allowing them to move like a single, unstoppable force. Kale's precision strikes complemented Ava's agility, and together they dismantled the syndicate operatives with ruthless efficiency. Joran, however, was no ordinary foe. He moved with calculated precision, his plasma blades cutting through the air with deadly intent. Ava barely dodged one of his strikes, the blade slicing through her jacket. "You can't win," Joran sneered. "That bond of yours is a curse. It'll destroy you." Kale stepped in, his golden eyes blazing. "Not if we control it." In a desperate gamble, Ava activated the neural bridge node. The machine roared to life, its energy enveloping her and Kale in a blinding light. Their bond surged, their minds intertwining in a way that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Joran lunged toward them, but the node's energy lashed out, sending him flying across the room. He hit the wall with a sickening thud and didn't get up. A new understanding. When the light faded, Ava and Kale stood in silence. The bond was still there, but it felt different, calmer, stronger. They could sense each other's presence clearly, but the chaotic noise was gone. "It worked," Kale said, his voice tinged with relief. Ava smiled faintly. "Yeah, it did." As they left the facility, the weight of their journey ahead settled on them. The syndicate would keep coming, and their bond would continue to evolve. But for the first time, they faced the future with a sense of unity. Together, they would take on whatever challenges awaited them, two souls bound by fate, navigating the unknown. Chapter 4. A Bond Unbreakable. The calm before the storm. The neural bridge node's chamber glowed with faint pulses of energy as Ava and Kale prepared for the final step. The chaos of Joran Vex's assault still echoed in their minds, but their newfound synchronization gave them a level of focus and resolve neither had felt before. "We've stabilized the bond," Kale said, his voice even, "but we're not out of danger yet. The syndicate will keep coming." Ava glanced at him, her usual sarcasm giving way to sincerity. "Then let's make sure they regret ever coming after us." The bond between them felt stronger now, less like a forced connection and more like a partnership. Ava could sense Kale's calm, calculated thoughts blending with her own quick instincts, while Kale felt Ava's resourcefulness bolstering his resolve. For the first time, they were truly in sync. The neural bridge node had given them clarity, but it also came with a warning. Their bond was now permanent. They couldn't undo it, but they could learn to live with it and perhaps even thrive. The syndicate returns. Their victory against Joran had not gone unnoticed. As Ava and Kale prepared to leave Varenus, the unmistakable hum of approaching ships filled the air. The syndicate, unwilling to accept failure, had sent reinforcements an entire fleet, led by a massive dreadnought known as the Oblivion Shadow. Inside their freighter, Ava activated the ship's systems while Kale calibrated the weapons. Tinker, Ava's sarcastic drone companion, floated nervously around the cockpit. "This is suicide," Tinker said, its metallic voice tinged with panic. "Do you have any idea how many ships they've brought? It's overkill." Ava smirked, her hands flying over the controls. "Good thing we don't do kill easily." Kale's voice was calm but firm. "We need a strategy. Outrunning them isn't an option." Ava's eyes flicked to the display, where the Syndicate fleet loomed like a wall of death. "Then we take the fight to them." The Battle of Varanus. The freighter shot out of the atmosphere, its engines roaring. Syndicate fighters swarmed like angry wasps, their plasma cannons lighting up the void. Ava maneuvered the ship with precision, her movements eerily in sync with Kale's tactical instructions. "Target the lead ship's propulsion systems," Kale said. "If we cripple their flagship, we can force a retreat." Ava nodded. "On it." Kale manned the freighter's weapons, his training as a Vexery soldier evident in his precise targeting. Plasma bolts streaked through space, striking the enemy fighters with deadly accuracy. Meanwhile, Ava pushed the ship to its limits, dodging incoming fire with near-superhuman reflexes. Their bond gave them an edge, the ability to react as one, to anticipate each other's moves. It was as if they were two parts of the same mind, working seamlessly together. But the Syndicate wasn't backing down. The Oblivion Shadow loomed ahead, its massive cannons charging for a devastating strike. "We're not going to make it," Tinker wailed. "Do you have a death wish?" Ava ignored the drone, her gaze steely. "Kale, we need something big." Kale's golden eyes narrowed. "The node's energy pulse. We could overload it." Ava's brow furrowed. "You're saying we use the bond?" Kale nodded. "If we synchronize fully, we might be able to channel its energy into a controlled blast. But it's risky." Ava's lips curved into a determined grin. "When isn't it?" The power of the bond. As the Syndicate fleet closed in, Ava and Kale accessed the neural interface, their minds merging completely. The bond surged with energy, and for a moment, they weren't just individuals, they were a singular force, a perfect fusion of human ingenuity and Vexery precision. Kale focused on stabilizing the energy, his disciplined mind guiding the chaotic flow. Ava channeled her instincts, pushing the energy outward with sheer determination. Together, they directed the pulse toward the Oblivion Shadow. The resulting blast was blinding. A wave of pure energy rippled through space, disabling the Syndicate fleet systems. Ships spun out of control, their weapons and engines fried by the surge. The Oblivion Shadow was left adrift, its massive frame powerless against the vacuum of space. As the light faded, Ava and Kale collapsed back into their seats, their bond humming with residual energy. "We did it," Ava whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. Kale nodded, his breathing steady despite the strain. "They won't follow us now. Not after that." A new beginning. With the Syndicate fleet defeated, Ava and Kale charted a course away from Varanus, their freighter disappearing into the stars. The victory was bittersweet, they had survived, but their bond was now a permanent part of their lives. As they sat in the cockpit, the silence between them was comfortable, almost companionable. Ava glanced at Kale, a small smile tugging at her lips. "So," she said, "what now? Do we just live with this?" Kale looked at her, his golden eyes thoughtful. "We adapt. We use it. The bond is no longer a burden, it's a tool." Ava chuckled. "That's the most optimistic thing I've ever heard you say." Kale allowed himself a faint smile. "Perhaps I've been influenced." Their journey wasn't over, but for the first time, they faced it with a sense of unity. The bond that had once been their greatest fear was now their greatest strength. As the freighter sailed into the unknown, Ava and Kale knew one thing for certain. Together, they were unstoppable.